The following podcast is brought to you exclusively by the Rad Rob Radio Network.
Welcome to the Leadership Evolution Podcast, where we explore what happens after the build. I'm Luke Mickelson, founder, leader, and someone who's walked through the challenges of growing an organization, letting go, and learning how to lead in a completely new way. This podcast is for founders, executives, and leaders who are navigating growth, identity, and the tension between control and legacy. Because building something great is only the beginning. Learning how to evolve with it, that's the real work. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Leadership Evolution Podcast. You know where you're at, and you know who this is. This is Luke Mickelson, your host, and hopefully guide, journeyman, whatever you want to call that. Not journeyman, but guide through this wonderful episode. I'm excited. Not very often, guys, do we get this type of experience when it comes to business, expertise, how to maintain, exit, different strategies that with our guest that you're going to get today. He's a seasoned entrepreneur, business turnaround specialist, which I thought was interesting, and leadership mentor with more than 45 years of experience acquiring, operating, transforming, and selling businesses. So throughout his career, Rich has built organizations around three unwavering principles. Get this: integrity, exceptional customer service, and investing in people. We all have heard those before. While many leaders focus on systems and strategy, Rich believes lasting success comes from developing motivated employees into confident, capable leaders. His greatest passion has been helping people grow, not only in their careers, but also in their personal lives. By creating cultures where people are trusted, challenged, and supported, he has consistently built organizations that thrive because of their people. A lifelong speaker and communicator, Rich brings decades of practical leadership experience and a passion for helping leaders build organizations where people flourish and businesses endure. Our guest today is Rich Ashton. Rich, how you doing?
Man, I want to meet that guy. Thank you so much for that intro. I appreciate it.
Well, you're meeting him today. We are too. We're blessed. So tell me a little bit about yourself. Yeah, tell me a little bit about yourself. What did I miss in that intro?
Well, you didn't miss much. I started out in a big company, and fortunately, it was an entrepreneurial company, and I enjoyed that, and I learned a ton. A bunch of smart, driven people, but for some reason, I always knew I was a small business guy. And so I left them and sold my interest back to them and went into the world of small business 45 years ago. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. I knew what my skill sets were. And so I kind of decided that I would find businesses that matched up with those skill sets, and whether I needed to turn the business around or just operate it for a while and then get out of it. I've done a variety of things, and I've had fun at every stop. I haven't always succeeded, but I've had fun.
Hey, you know what? That's well said. What is it, Rich, about business? I mean, growing up, did you have aspirations of starting your own business? Were you born entrepreneurial minded?
Yeah, it's a good question. My dad was a school administrator, but he always had something going on the side, and I think he really was a frustrated entrepreneur. In that generation, being an entrepreneur was not something that you heard a lot about. And so the safety and security of a real job, meant more to him than going out and doing these other things. But he always was dabbling. And the only place I can look to think where I got it is from him.
We all have an itch at some point. Some of them are a little stronger itch than others, for sure. Rich, you've spent more than 4 decades acquiring, rebuilding, and leading companies. Looking back, what leadership lessons, and let's just to kick our conversation off, what leadership lessons took you the longest to truly understand?
Oh, that's an easy one. Unfortunately, I have to tell stories on myself to answer that one.
Amen.
Again, copying my dad, as most young guys do. If your dad's successful, why would you not want to copy his style? But my dad was a very authoritarian leader, not uncommon coming out of that generation. And I carried that authoritarian style of leadership to excess into the start of my career. And because my career, I was plugged into a really successful system at the company that I worked for, so I had early success, and it masked some of the weaknesses in my style. Around the age of 40, I began to stall in my career. Some things were not working for me that were working for other people. And entrepreneurs tend to run in packs, and so I had a number of entrepreneurial friends, and I watched them succeed in their businesses with the same challenges I was facing and failing at. And so I had to step back, take stock, and decide that if I was going to continue on this path, I was going to make some changes. And the number one thing was understanding that it was not about me, it was about everybody else. Fortunately, I am married to a rock star relationship builder. And although she's not in business at all, she's just really, really good at relationships. And I finally quit fighting it, and I just said, you're going to learn something from this woman. And I did. And I learned from her about the fundamentals of building relationships with people and taking your ego out of the equation. Coincidentally, it was the same thing my friends were doing that I was not doing. They were way better at dealing with people. I had a bit of a my way or the highway mentality, and it wasn't working then. It doesn't work now. And so that was the leadership lesson that was the slowest for me to grab hold of, and yet it was the most important one for the remainder of my career.
I think that's a pretty common one too. And as I look back, even in my own career, I was on a podcast, and the guy asked me, if you could go back to your early 20s, go back to yourself, what's the one advice you give yourself? And I thought about it for a minute, and I said, you know what it would be? It'd be, hey, bud, you don't know nothing. There are people out there that are going to have amazing ideas, and it's okay that you don't know maybe what they're talking about. They bring up topics that you don't understand. Don't act like you do. Don't act like you know what's going on. It's okay to ask a question. So let me ask you this question, Rich. What is it about entrepreneurs, right? What is it about you and I and your friends that becomes a problem? Like ego becomes a problem. I have my thoughts on it, but I'd like to know your thoughts. Why is that such a hard thing for us founders and CEOs?
Well, if you think about it, it takes a pretty healthy ego to start a business.
Exactly.
If you don't have, a lot of self-confidence, this is not the field for you.
Right.
And it's a matter of reining it in and finding out the danger zones. When is it starting to hurt me rather than help me?
Right.
And if you're not careful, and if you're starting a small business, you only have 2 or 3 or 4 people around you, and you have a great filter. They don't know as much as you do, or, at least they think they don't. And so they're not likely to come up and say, Rich, put that ego in check. That comes from a mentor or a strong friend or a family member.
Or a wife.
And if you don't have a lot of people around you who are good filters for you, good feedback mechanisms, it can get out of hand really quickly. I think I've seen that fail or become a huge problem more often than it's a success for that very reason. There are just not enough advisors in the room.
Yeah. And as a part of leadership evolution too, is certainly the first stage of starting an organization. I mean, there's a lot of sacrifices that go into start a company. I mean, as you know as well as anybody, and those sacrifices, especially in my experience in nonprofit world, where, nonprofits, Well, for-profit as well, but mostly nonprofits, they start from some sort of trauma or some sort of, dramatic event that happens in people's lives. It becomes very personal to them, right? And so as they start and sacrifice and, give this new project, this new company, their all, I get it. I understand why because it becomes you. It's, you have what's called identity fusion that happens, right? You and your organization become one. And man, it is hard not to be defensive of that. It's hard to be known as, I'm known as the bed building guy, So if there's a topic that comes up that surrounds that I don't know about, man, I was so afraid that I would expose my ignorance, which was a sign for me, that was a sign of weakness, right? And I think a lot of founders struggle with that. They want to be the so-called the smartest guy in the room because I think they feel like it was some sort of weakness, and they can't show that, or at least feel they can't.
But that line between healthy ego and too much ego is not a clear line, and it's different for everybody in every situation. So it's very, very hard to know when at your core, that what you contributed to the business is the reason that it's a business.
Sure.
And at some point, somebody else knows more about you, not necessarily about your business, but about parts of your business, whether it's HR or operations. Entrepreneurs are good at some stuff, but they're not good at everything. And which one of those things do you offload? Entrepreneurs are generally good at vision. They're good at marketing generally, sometimes finance. The creative side is usually good, but operations are generally not good. The details of accounting are generally not an entrepreneurial skill set. So I think there's no one line where it takes over, but I think you have to be open to the things that you don't do well and either look for advice in those areas or bring in people who have stronger skill sets in those areas when you can afford to. Bring them in and then offload as much of that responsibility so that you can concentrate on the things you do well.
Yeah. So you hit 40, you had this revelation. Like me, I had a wife that was kind of letting me know, hey, you know what? You probably got to listen to more people. So where did you go from there? I mean, you started making some adjustments. What's some adjustments that you made that you saw success from, and how was that evolved in your leadership efforts?
I have always been reliant on mentors. I don't always ask as many questions of those people as I should. But it was so clear to me that I was failing in 2 or 3 or 4 areas. And I just isolated those areas and said, who's doing this well? And I went and talked to them and watched them and copied behaviors that were worth copying. And it was a gradual thing. But again, the idea that it was about the people that I was working with, not about me, that was like a veil being lifted, over my eyes. Because I had always felt like it was about me. It was all up to me. And that's a high pressure situation, but it's a limiting situation. And so I just think it was gradual. I reconnected with my faith in my mid 40s. And that was a big piece of it, realizing that I knew I wasn't God, but I wasn't sure who he was. And as I found that out and began to rely on his help, it also made me a better person and steered me in the right direction.
Wow, amazing! I'm actually kind of the opposite. I lost my faith when I started my organization, and some of it was because there was parts of it that started because I was lost, didn't know who I was, where I was going, what I believed, but I did know one thing for sure, and that was building beds for kids. I don't care what God you believe in, that's the right thing to do. So I hung on to that, but I get it. I think everybody goes through a period of time in their life where, man, you kind of question who you are and what you believe and what's important to you. I think, measures of success change in people's lives, which cause you to ask some questions about who you are. So So let's get into this. This podcast, I started this, Rich, and we talked a little bit before we started here, how this is your wheelhouse, right? And I want to get into why you think that. This podcast started because I wanted to better understand the evolution of my leadership and career that was happening right before my eyes. And I didn't know how to deal with some of the very personal and very emotional transitions that happen. As you've mentioned before, you decide, hey, this is not about me. And I think to start out as founders, would you agree that founders, that's a very common thing, because at the beginning it is all about you, right? It is, you're answering all the questions, you're solving all the problems, you're wearing all the hats. So is it really a far stretch that most founders feel the same way?
No, not at all. I do think that's where you start. I just think it's where ego becomes a problem. And I don't know if most get over themselves or if just enough do, where it looks like a lot of people do. But it is, I think it's very, very common to founders, regardless of the industry.
What do you think? Where can it, like, if you were talking to a founder, if you were talking to yourself at 39, and how would you tell whether you're starting to cross over into the, let's say, the ego of inhibiting growth or preventing the company from being successful?
I think, in everything, self-awareness, reading the room, those are really important skills. And I think that when you are immersed in your business, it's very difficult sometimes to get that 30,000-foot view of what's really going on. Had I been better at that time, and had I kind of zoomed out and made it a point to periodically zoom out, I would have identified some of the things that I was doing wrong. Not all of them, because I think sometimes people have to tell you. I have a really, really good friend, my closest friend, who is an entrepreneur, quite a bit younger than I am, but we worked together and then we've remained friends ever since. And he is one person in my life who can say, hey, and he doesn't tell me what to do. He doesn't slap me across the face, but he nudges me in a direction. And it is my personality that if you nudge me and plant that seed, I may not come back to it for a week, but ultimately I will, and I'll deal with it. And so I bet you there were times when he said, I don't think I had any impact. But then 10 days later, I would come back to him and say, I really appreciated what you did, because this is how I incorporated it. This is how I solved that problem. I was just thanking him for that just last week, as a matter of fact, because fairly recently, he gave me one of those nudges when I was struggling with a decision. And I said, what a great thing to have a close friend who's willing to just plant a seed. You don't have to do it his way, but he wants you to understand that there's something going on, as well as he knows you, that isn't quite right. It's a great value to me.
Yeah, I've got exactly one of those. I think some of the hardest things in life, Rich, if not the hardest thing in life, is to learn how to be just honest with yourself, right? And sometimes there's so much you have such a big blind spot that's almost impossible without having one of those friends that say, hey, you know what? You're kind of being ridiculous right now, which is exact words that my friend has told me before. And, to have that trust in someone is important. Let me ask this question. You've been successful turning around a number of companies. So in your experience, are struggling businesses usually a system of problems, or are they ultimately a leadership problem? Does that make sense?
Those two are pretty closely aligned. I think anyone that I took over that was doing poorly had poor leadership, and as a result of poor leadership, had poor systems, and especially had poor culture. If you go through a period in a business with bad leadership, you're going to wind up with a toxic culture, because leadership does not take care of the culture, because they don't even recognize the value of a positive culture. In many cases, they've never experienced one. The HVAC company that I bought in the late 80s and still own today had as toxic a culture as anybody could imagine. It was a company that had lost 80% of their business over a 3-year period. And the employees knew that they weren't doing as much business, but they didn't really know that anything was wrong because the previous management had not been transparent. And, they knew a lot of the employees were gone by then, but it never, sometimes leaders assume that what is obvious to them is obvious to employees or obvious to the people they lead. It isn't. It isn't. And so part of what I always have done is I've been very transparent. I've shared my failures. I've shared my vision, and I've asked them to, come along and trust me. Not all of them did. And especially because I'm not an HVAC guy. When I bought an HVAC company, I was almost laughed out of the industry. I was a real estate guy by training. And they thought, gosh, he writes pretty well. He puts stuff down on paper. That all looks good. He talks well, but he's not going to turn this thing around. And for the first 2 years, they were right. What I thought was going to take me 2 years took me 5. But ultimately in the end, I prevailed. But it took weeding out a really toxic culture, getting rid of a lot of people I really wish I hadn't had to get rid of in order to turn it around. But in that, I think I mentioned culture several times there. My belief is that just as it's all about people, it's all about the culture that you create along with those people to take advantage of their skills, to empower them to become more than they ever thought they'd be. When you can do that, when you can build a culture like that, you can conquer the world.
Is that probably is that the first step when you encounter a business like the HVAC business struggling, going downhill, is that usually the first step that you take in establishing, okay, we need to turn the ship around?
If you have time, maybe. I didn't have time. The company, actually, I found out soon that the company was on the blocks to be liquidated by the bank. The bank was going to call their loan and shut them down. And so I had no time. So as I was trying to establish culture, most of the time I was fighting a financial battle with a really short stick. And so I didn't have the luxury of concentrating on one or the other. I concentrated on both and a couple more things along the way.
Well, it's been successful.
Yeah, it worked. Pardon me?
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
No, I just, I think it's different in every company, but at some point you have to install the culture that works for you and works for the people in order to grow as fast as you can grow and as successful as you can grow. You have to know who you are. We installed a culture of, we're going to provide exceptional customer service and we're going to do it through the empowerment and support of our employees. And when you say something like that, you better not settle for good service. It better be exceptional, or there's no sense talking about it. If you say you're going to empower employees, you'd better give them some power. Better give them an opportunity to fail. And so I just, that's what works for me. It would not work for everybody, does not work for everybody. So culture is not a single thing. Culture is different in every company, but good cultures tend to have similar attributes.
As I interviewed a lot of coaches, business coaching and CEOs, company leaders, business leaders rather, culture is almost undoubtedly always brought up, and it's a very big center of successful business and management styles. And I like to focus in now, Rich, more on like a founder's experience, right? So taking all these entrepreneurs listening, these startups, or maybe CEOs, founders that are smack dab in the middle of their organization, it's growing, it's being successful. One thing that happens that's difficult, quite frankly, and it's not something that I think gets talked about a lot, is as the transition happens, as a leader and the founder of an organization starts taking hats off and gives to other leaders as they grow in a nonprofit or a for-profit company, boards govern, tightens, policies come into play. How hard is it, or have you dealt with, I should say, leaders, especially founders that have struggled to maintain their culture Because as you bring more people in your organization, they're going to have other ideas, especially as the founder might be stepping away from traditional roles or allowing other people to take roles. Meetings happen that you're not involved in, or even asked to be, events happen that you're not asked about or consulted on. These are all signs of growing and healthy businesses. But I know as a founder, the culture that you've established that is successful, that can be very difficult to maintain. What do you tell a founder that might be struggling with that?
Well, that's a really foundational question, and I'm not sure anybody has asked it quite that way, but I like that question. My answer to that is that promoting from within, if you have time to train your people to take on leadership roles, is the way that you protect your culture. You're always in danger when you bring in people from outside the organization. And I used earlier operations as an example. So if you bring in an operations manager from another company, probably it's going to be a larger company. They're good at operations. They are not good at the other 10 things that you do in a small company every day and that people are asked to do. And so when that person comes into your organization, they may not want to do more than the just operation piece. That's what they're trained in. Mm-hmm. They may be so frustrated by the chaos and disorganization of your small business that they don't relate well to your existing employees. And those employees are the people who got you there. They're the people who are looking around and going, wait a minute, when somebody was going to get a bigger salary and take on more responsibility, we got left behind. And so they're not going to respond well to that outsider unless he or she is an exceptional adapter and leader. So having had that problem over the years and having both brought in people who weren't a fit and promoted people before they were ready, I resolved that as I got older and had more time on my hands because I was working through a general manager, I was going to develop a system for developing leaders in our company who ultimately could take over the company when I was ready to retire. It was a long process. It was not a smooth process. I failed at it the first time because I was doing it wrong. But once I got it right, we trained 8 people in leadership. And we started with evaluating what was holding them back. Why had they not progressed? And in most cases, it's just because they really never thought of themselves as leaders. It's a blue-collar company, and a technician thinks about being a better technician, but he doesn't think about being service manager necessarily, or even what it means to be service manager. And so I taught them 35 principles of leadership with a lot of anecdotes, made it very simple so that they learn the way that I learn. And those 35 principles ultimately became a book, although they were not written down with the intention of ever becoming a book. But over a 3-year period, the team was able to take over the business.
What's the name of your book? We need to talk about that. I mean, people need to know where to find that.
The book is Growing Your Own. The website is growingyourown.net. And it was written, I wrote blogs to the team because I wanted them to start talking about leadership and business principles. And we made them discuss them in management meetings. And they began holding each other accountable, and they used the blogs. They still use the blogs, although they're in book form now. It's a very simple, very basic book for people, for small business owners who don't have time to train, and most of them don't because they're trying to survive. And it is for leaders who have not received very much training along the way. And then it became a reference book that they keep on their desk and refer to all the time.
It seems like that's one of your enjoyments in life, is developing people, helping people, leaders especially, grow. Would you say that's true?
100%. I've gotten more enjoyment out of doing that in the business world than anything else. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask this question. I wrote this down earlier, and let's see if I get this right. So with that, when did you realize that being your greatest joy or legacy, that it wouldn't be building necessarily businesses, but the leaders that you developed why do you think you like that more? What was it about that versus, as I talk to the coaches, Rich, they love building businesses. I'm probably one of those guys. I love building stuff, right? But I never really looked at what you would probably consider the most important part, which was building the leaders within.
There's a time, you're considerably younger than I am, and so some of this is age related. There is a point in your life where, I had done it. I'd done it for a long time. I'd had some success, and so that was fun. I loved building businesses. I loved going to the office every day until about a year and a half ago, and I knew that something had changed. But along the way, I was very aware that the end of my routine business day was on the horizon somewhere. I worked far longer than most people do. And I'm 77 now, and I've only been retired for 6 months. But I knew along the way that I needed to be actively planning my exit from the company. And I just didn't want to sell the company. I didn't want to ruin the culture, expose the employees to a group that would come in and just totally strip what we had built over the years. And it was very important to me not to do that. But back to your question, as I got older, I went from focusing on building the businesses to the legacy that I was going to leave behind. And it's easy to think in terms of legacy when you're talking about building up people, not only to become leaders, but to become leaders at home, to become leaders in the community, to become just better, more successful people. How could you not want to do that? And if that is a product of, or if that is the outcome of building a business while you're building the people and letting the people then build the business to a greater height, gosh, that's a win in every direction.
You're absolutely right. I 100% agree. And let me ask you, as you're in your journey, right? There had to have been some point, and I want to learn from you on this, as you've grown your businesses and as they've gotten bigger and you've brought more management in turn and more people coming into your business. Was there times as a founder of your organization, were there times that you almost felt pushed out? You almost felt like, hey, there's decisions that are happening that I'm not being consulted on. Are there times that happened? I'm sure. And when they did, how'd you handle that? How'd that make you feel?
Yes and no. The structure that we had, there really wasn't any way to leave me out. I had mechanisms to be aware of what was going on. Now, I had three people over the years in particular who tried to circumvent the processes. And, after dealing with them directly, they just had to be gone. They were toxic in the company. They were trying to do things that were not positive for the other employees, certainly weren't positive for me. It always struck me as being odd that someone would think they could mount an insurrection with somebody that owned the company or against someone that owned the company. It wasn't going to happen. And so it happened 3 times. I prevailed in all 3 times. I let it go in 2 cases further than I should have let it go. And ultimately, I always hate to pull the I own this thing card. But at some point you have to go, look, are you forgetting somehow, how this thing works? Ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm going to make that call. And ultimately I did. And in all 3 cases, they had to leave the company. Wow. But as far as being pushed out, I was never close to being pushed out. And I never had a feeling of being pushed out. I have a great enough relationship with the leadership team that I don't feel that at all. And now that I'm out of the building, I still don't feel that. And being out of the building was my choice, not theirs. So.
Have you consulted with other leaders that have felt that or dealt with that, maybe not in such a great way?
I don't think anybody I've talked to has actually felt like they were being run out of the company.
One area of a topic that I talk about a lot, one of the reasons why I started this this podcast is a phenomenon called founder syndrome, where founders, and it's more evident for sure in a nonprofit situation because you don't own the company, right? No one does. It's owned, if you will, or managed by an executive director who's then managed by the board of directors, and it's difficult being a founder because typically founders are the executive directors until they get to a certain point where the company's and the organization is big enough to where it needs more management. So then you become the founder and just another employee. And I have talked to other CEOs for for-profit companies that have felt some of this too, as their leadership evolution grows and they allow more people to come in. These things that happen, these events that they were usually otherwise consulted on or a part of, or even recognized for, they're no longer that way. Someone else is stepping into that role. Founders have a hard time with that. Not, at least in my case, I didn't have a problem with executing, bringing more people in the organization because I knew it needed to happen, right? That's a sign of growth. But no one talked to me about the feelings that happen when those decisions come around, right? When those events, what I call little relevance wounds, stab a founder, when you feel like, hey, am I even relevant anymore? Like, are these decisions that are happening that I wasn't consulted on my own organization? That's hurtful, right? What advice would you have to a leader like myself to navigate around some of those feelings?
I would say watch the signs. I'm a very direct communicator, and if I saw any signs of that happening, then we were going to talk about it, and I'm going to be angry. But I wanted to understand, in the cases that I'm talking about, I wanted to understand what their ultimate end game was, what they were trying to accomplish. Did they recognize what it looked like, not only to me, but to others in the organization? And is that really how they wanted to operate? And two of them, the answer was yes, that's how I want to operate. And there's not much you can do about it. This is going to be a short conversation then. But what I think I would say, I really preach proactivity. And the minute that I suspected something like that was going on, I would confront it. I'm big on controlling the narrative. And not only would I confront the person, I would go talk to the people that I thought were affected by what was going on and get the real scoop so that I was not acting emotionally, I was acting rationally. And if I was, these things happen in stages, and even the stages might only take a week, but you need to gather your facts, because when that person is gone, then you have damage control to do. And you need to explain. It wasn't just that they opposed Rich. It was how they were going about it, the damage to the organization, and we just simply were not going to operate that way. So I think being aware at the earliest possible time and dealing with it immediately.
Right then. Squash the bug.
You have
if you will. Yeah. So
when people think they are operating in the dark, they'll do stuff. They'll do bad stuff. And the longer they get to operate with where they think you're allowing it or you don't see it, it doesn't get better. It only gets worse.
Yeah, that's great advice. That's excellent. You stepped away or retired not too long ago, and you're a little older than normal, I would say, for retirees. What was it, Rich? Why so late? What was it? Was it hard to let go?
No, it really wasn't. I was having too much fun, and my parents lived until their mid-90s, and so I've got great longevity genes. And I just always thought, as long as I am relevant and having this much fun, then why would I want to go do anything else? I was actually having more fun working than I was going to the golf course, and so until one day last year when I said to my wife before I went in the morning, I said, if I didn't have to go in, I wouldn't go in today. She said, in 44 years, I have never heard you say that. And I knew, and that was when I knew that I was on the right path. I was well down the line of making my edit anyway, just because I didn't want to wind up being the old guy in the corner drooling at some point. I wanted to be there as long as I was relevant, but not a minute longer. And so that was the day that I said, okay, I'm on the right path. I'm out of here in about 8 months, and it worked out perfectly.
That's all. Did you ever feel irrelevant at any time in this exit strategy?
No.
Wow.
No. And I have been, thanks to that friend I mentioned earlier, that's something he brought up to me a long time ago. And he said, because he's had the same situation in his company. And he said, I think about my own relevance every single day. And I thought that's a great thing to keep at the top of your sheet on a daily to-do list. Am I relevant? And you can tell when you're not. Again, read the room, read the signs, but you can tell.
I think some founders, and maybe again, this is more in a nonprofit sector where the founder isn't the CEO and you never have full control over your organization per se. But sometimes relevance is perspective, and oftentimes founders deal with real hard feelings, relevance wounds, because they don't feel like they're needed as much. Especially when you start out any organization, man, you're wearing all the hats, right? You're making all the decisions. So you're needed quite a bit. But as those hats come off, that need goes down. You're not on the, you with me? I lost you for a second. You're not on the need totem pole as high, maybe. And that can feel like less value to the organization and less worth to the organization. As someone that's consulted many businesses, what's probably the best advice you'd give to founders, CEOs that are thinking about leaving, maybe feel that their relevance is being tested or questioned, or maybe they're just realizing they're getting to the point where I'm the bottleneck or I'm the inhibition of success here?
I don't know what to tell them if it's already happened, because they have a problem on their hands. But I do think I think succession planning is something that you need to be pretty proactive about. I don't know what age is appropriate because it depends on the individual. But I think you have to know what's going to ultimately make you happy. You also have to know what you're going to. In my case, because I had the book and I wanted to do some speaking, I had a natural progression into a new life. And so I knew I would enjoy it, and I am really enjoying that. If I didn't have that, I'd be stuck going to the golf course and hanging out at coffee shops, I think, otherwise. But I have really enjoyed having something to do. I think it's important to know what you're going to do when you stop working, or at least stop working in the business that you founded. For me, it was at least 15 years that I thought about it. And I had exited other businesses, but I didn't have the passion for them that I do for the business that I've been with so long. And so I knew this was going to be, or could be, somewhat traumatic. So I really started 15 years ago, and I didn't always have a clear idea. I talked to people about selling. I determined, it was clear to me that was not a route that I really wanted to take. And I just think for everybody, it's going to be different. I want to go back to something you said about maintaining relevance. And I think the best way to head off irrelevance is to begin a program of acquiring knowledge. I was lucky. I was recommended that path when I was 24 years old. So I've been doing it for over 50 years. And I read about an hour and a half every day now because I have time to. But if you are committed to learning things every day, if only for 10 minutes, if you're listening to podcasts or audiobooks or reading or whatever it is, if you only did it 10 minutes a day and you did it every day, that's 50 minutes a week. That's 2 or 3 hours a month. And the amount of knowledge that you can acquire with a disciplined program of acquiring knowledge is astounding. I can't think of anything that makes you more relevant than having the amount of insight that comes from a breadth of knowledge. And I'm not talking about just reading about business. My rule is that if I read one type of book today, I won't read that type of book again until I've completed 4 others. I read periodicals. I read the Wall Street Journal every day, and on a variety of subjects. I think that has kept me relevant. I hope it keeps me relevant a while longer.
I'm sure it has. You're relevant to all those companies you've helped, Rich. You've been amazing. Last question before we wrap up, and you've been awesome, and I want to give you a chance to really share what you want to share. But we talked about, and you mentioned that this podcast, when you read about it, this really was right down your alley. Tell us why.
Well, I think the exit plan is one of the most difficult things for founders. We've talked a little bit about that. And I just think it takes preparation. I took a different path. Most people do not choose to hang on to the company. And ultimately, I will bring in an investor, but I want them to invest in a team that is strong and proven. And I want that to be one of the assets they buy. I don't want them to feel like they could come in and buy this company and then strip it and it just be another HVAC company, because it's not just another HVAC company. So that's unique to me, and it took more planning for me to be able to build a team that could actually run the business. I just haven't gotten a chance to talk about that with very many people who are thinking about exiting. I think what happens is there's so many people out there looking to buy businesses that you field 100 inquiries, and finally one kind of strikes your fancy. You start talking to them, and before you know it, you're in a contract to sell your business, and you really haven't thought a whole lot more other than, I'm about to have all that money in my bank account instead of somebody else's bank account for a change, and that would be nice. But had I done that, all I would have had was money. And I wouldn't have had the legacy. I wouldn't have felt good about it, and I would have worried every day what was happening to those employees. So it wasn't right for me. But what's right for the founder is what's the right thing to do.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. I loved it's the word legacy, right? And that's something. Maybe there's some interchangeable words for that, but legacy really is something that founders need to start planning for. You started planning it 15 years before it happened. I think that's something that is missed, and you're right, not talked about very much. And the Leadership Evolution podcast is about building legacy, right? And even just starting out about thinking about legacy. I share this all the time. Some of the best advice I ever got, I was on a podcast and the lady said, I was starting a company. My friend had a friend like you and I had, said, you need to realize that your organization, this company you're starting, it's not going to love you as much as you love it. And what I think what they mean by that is, listen, this is going to carry on. If it's successful, and if you're dedicated to it and want it to be successful, it's going to grow on beyond you. It's a good time to start planning legacy about that and making decisions that ultimately, like you said, I love you. And if you sell your company, you just got a bank account full of money, right? What happens after that? That's the legacy. It's not just about the founder. It's about isn't it about the employees? Isn't it about the integrity of the company and the legacy that you leave behind? So Rich, you've been amazing. I mean, my gosh, it's great to have you, your expertise, and it's very valuable. And I hope my listeners, how can they get a hold of you? How can they learn more about Rich and what you have to offer?
Well, as I said earlier, the website is growingyourown.net. And I love to hear from people directly. If you want to email me at rich@growingyourown.net. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I don't do a lot of other social media, but follow me on LinkedIn. Let's have a chat. I'd love to talk to people.
Awesome. Well, you've heard it from the man, everybody. Rich Ashton, thanks for being on. Thanks for being such a great leader and sharing, 45 years worth of expertise and knowledge to us learners out there. So thanks for showing up.
Hey, thanks very much for having me. I enjoyed it just like I knew I would.
Thank you for joining me on the Leadership Evolution podcast. If something in today's conversation challenged you, stretched you, or made you think a little differently, that's the point. Growth always starts with awareness. And if you are struggling in your journey, if you feel like you are fading away from what you have built, visit my website, lukemickelson.com, and learn how you can take back your confidence and create lasting legacy. If you found value in this episode, please share it with another leader who may be in the middle of their own evolution. And remember, your role as a leader isn't just to build something successful. It's to build something that lasts. Build what outlives you.